So something that's really important to me in production is snares. And this could have been because I started out drumming before I produced electronic music. And then what got me into electronic music was Pendulum's work. And also Break, who's a great drum and bass artist. I ended up studying their snares. You know, Pendulum's got that classic punch snare. Break has this sort of crack snare. I determined there are three main components that make those snares sound awesome. There's a treble component at the beginning. Forgive my finger, I grossly injured it. Then there's a midsection that provides some body to the snare. And then there's a trail off component. So I'll show you an example. But first, I need some... I'm just going to start a new project in Ableton. Get rid of all but one pink MIDI track. So let's throw a drum rack on here. So I'll start with the body of the snare. So that's second part of the three. We have... That one's pretty cool. I'm going to actually pull the attack in. And then I'm going to pull the decay and sustain way down. We're just going to capture that center component, the boom kind of midsection. Then I would typically take my sampler and group it. So I have the midsection, and let's find something else. A rim shot is really handy for the beginning of the snare. This could also be a clap, a snap, or something, but the idea is it's something with a treble component. Take the tail off of this, so it's just the crack. When I play these together, it's got a bit more of a crack to it. In fact, I could change the attack on this a bit. Now let's add a tail to this. This metal gate. Actually, that's kind of cool. But in order to give the rest of the snare some room, I'm going to take the metal gate's attack way back. Then I'd throw like a compressor or a drum bus or whatever you want to add at the end, maybe a saturator. So let me show you some examples of how I've used this in the past. So this is Rooftop Anthem, the first D&B track I've released under PT. There are a few more samples in this, but let's break them down. There's my snare. So that's kind of providing an echo. That's kind of the body of the snare. You can see how I faded it in, similar to how I did the example. That's providing a tail end. That's a gunshot sound. And there's that attack right there. So that's what's actually making this snare sound crisp. You got a tambourine. That's cool. And there's another part of the body. So this has got a few more components, but it's essentially doing that same sort of thing. I'm gonna go to Trump memes. I really enjoyed how the snare came out in this. This sounds like the kick is hitting both during the kick and the snare. But what's actually happening is they're alternating, but I do have a kick sample inside the snare. I'm using it as the main body of the snare. Again, it's fading in gradually, and something else, which is the, nope, that's part of the body. This clap is starting off the snare. So that's making the snare sound crisp. This clap sample. This is part of the beginning as well. This is a bit of the body, or is it the DXP snare is that tail. I think that's the same snare as Ice. This is a track called Sunday. Why is there a dog sound in here? Okay, so here's the snare. I wanted it just to sound like a TR-808. So that's taking up the body, but you can see it's fading in. And it's a bit softer on its own. And at the very beginning, there's this clean snap sample. At one point, I had just recorded me snapping in front of a field recorder a bunch of times. Cut that down, stick it to the beginning. You get a much crisp, like more crisp beginning. Now there's another snap too. I like adding snaps to snares. It's actually 9 p.m. now. I came back to this and recorded another section because one other tip that I think is super useful for mixing both drums and mixing a track in general is to test it out in an ideal setting. So a lot of times I will stick a convolution reverb on the master chain and set it to something like a nightclub
sort of scenario, and then listen what everything sounds like. So if I was listening to it dry, I probably wouldn't have noticed the tone that the snare trails off with. It's almost as... I've had some snares that I've made where they had some little harmonic in them that I didn't even notice was in the snare until I threw it in a reverb, and then it was like, it sounded like a tone. Sometimes I'll even work on an entire track just with this on the master chain because it hurts my ears less when I'm blasting it through headphones, and it keeps me not thinking about each and every small detail. I hope this quick tutorial on snares was useful for you. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments.